Dr. Andrea Encalada for the penultimate talk this quarter for the Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation Biology seminar series. Andrea is a wonderful researcher, and my history with her goes way back. We actually went to graduate school together at Cornell University. In fact, we shared an office way back when. And so we both work in aquatic ecosystems. But just looking at her CV and everything that she's done since doing a postdoc in Portugal and then returning back to Ecuador to take a professorship, it's truly an extraordinary list of accomplishments. So Andrea's, well, she's a professor at Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. Am I reading this right, that you are now a provost there as well?
That's right.
Oh boy.
2 months, for 2 months now.
Okay. So she's done a lot of building at that institute. It's clear to me. So she's the founder and director of the Instituto de Investigaciones Biológicas y Ambientales there at the University of San Francisco. Also the founder and director of their aquatic ecology lab, the coordinator of the ecology program, and also the founder and director of their master's program in ecology. So this, in addition to having appointments over in Portugal and also at the UNC Chapel Hill, you have a lot of connections. And so Andrea does some amazing research. I'm going to let her talk about that, but it's not just basic research on ecological and evolutionary principles, but also applied research relating to the impacts of water diversions and dams and what that does to riverine ecosystems. So if you have questions for her, go ahead and put them up in the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. And if you have time to stick around at the end too, there'll be a little more time for us to bring you in as a panelist for people who want to stick on after the Q&A session and join a little informal discussion. So Andrea, please take it away.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you all. Thank you, Aaron. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. It's a real honor. I have been once in Corvallis, but this is the closest that I feel to Corvallis, so it's an honor for me. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm gonna put my presentation here. Can you see it? Yep.
Yes,
yeah.
Can see it.
All right. So let's see. So probably you saw that I had a different title. At the beginning, when Dave asked me to give a talk, I put a title that I don't even remember what it was. But then looking at the theme that you have for the seminar series of beating the barriers in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology, I thought that was very appealing. And I decided to change a little bit to talk about conservation and research in tropical rivers, and also give you kind of a trip from the Andes to the Amazon and the different things that we have been doing lately. And maybe with that, open for a reflection at the end and for a discussion and questions relating to how to beat those barriers. And so I, as Dave mentioned, I work with rivers and streams, and these ecosystems are fantastic, dynamic, and changing all the time. And so I want to tell a little bit of that in the Andes, Amazon, also in other places. You're going to see some pictures and some data from the Rockies as well. But I wanted to talk about free-flowing rivers and my interest in conservation of those rivers in the Andean Amazon region, and make maybe some analogy with my career, because it started very narrow with very specific questions related with the mayfly, and then it has been opening kind of in the ecological hierarchy. So I thought it would be nice to try to follow that flow from the small to the big things, and also from the Andes in the highlands to the lowlands. And through this journey, talk about the questions, the research, and the people that have motivated me in my research, and also talk a little bit about the river and Amazon region conservation. We have been working lately in the science panel for the Amazon, so I want to tell you a little bit about that. And then at the end, I want to open for reflections and questions about pitfalls and opportunities, especially for Latin American scientists. As David mentioned, I'm an Ecuadorian scientist, and I'm a woman that started to work on science when not that many people in Ecuador was working on science. So I think it will be nice to develop on that as well, if you guys want to ask questions about that throughout my career. So here's this picture from an Andean Amazon river. This is coming down from the Andes, and this is the ecological hierarchy that I was mentioning before. So I started to work more at the organism and population level and community level. And then I moved more to the ecosystem level, and also to analyze the region, the Amazon region, and also interested about some questions of global impact in this region of the planet, and some global questions related to climate change. And I love to start with this beautiful painting. This is from Frederick Church, and this painting was inspired in the travels of Alexander von Humboldt to Ecuador and to Latin America, and this is the place where I started to work. This here is the Antisana volcano. And the first rivers that I started to study were up here. Quito city, the city that I live in, is at almost 3,000 meters in altitude, pretty high up. And I started there. And but how I started to study these streams and these rivers was very unusual. I was in my last year in my bachelor's study in the Católica University, and by that time I was really interested in mammals, in bats actually, and I needed to take one more course. Was an elective course, and the title of this elective course was Lotic Ecology. I didn't know what Lotic Ecology was, but I liked ecology, so I said, okay, I'm going to take it. And I took the course with this guy, Dean Jacobsen. He's a professor at University of Copenhagen, and he was just visiting Ecuador. And it was interesting because, you know, I took the course, I didn't know what it was. And then he mentioned that was running water. So he was studying rivers and streams, and he wanted to compare Copenhagen rivers, you know, in Europe, with Ecuadorian rivers that were in the tropical side. So, and it was interesting because I did this course, I finished the course, and then he wanted a researcher to do an honor thesis. So I did an honor thesis with him, and that's how I started to work in rivers. The first time that I flipped a rock, I was amazed by the diversity that we had there. I didn't know that, you know, those running waters have animals on them. So I got completely fascinated by this. But that time I was already a mom. So I got married very young. I was 22 years old, and I was already a mom, and I started to study these streams, and I finished my thesis work, and this is Ecuador. And at that time in 1997, we still didn't recognize that we had a fight with Peru. So this part was, now it's Peru, but before we considered this Ecuador. So this is a map of Ecuador, and I studied this part of the Andes. I didn't know at that time that these rivers that I was studying were really Amazon rivers, because they were born in the Andes, but they were running to the Amazon really. And it was very, very interesting because at that time, nobody had studied rivers in Ecuador. So we were the first ones to study rivers in Ecuador. Before that, only Paul Colimbo had been in Ecuador doing research in lakes, in high altitude lakes, and also in some lagoons in Galapagos. So the only freshwater papers by then were from Colimbo. So with this honor thesis, we basically were asking very, very basic questions about what is the chemistry of the water, what is the organisms that live there. And here you see, and this is, I don't even have a copy in my computer of my thesis anymore. So this is the basically description of the families that we find there. There was no taxonomic keys by that time. So everything that we identify here was based on the taxonomic keys that were used in Europe. And that was really interesting because some of the families here, they are no longer the same families. They got changed with the studies now. So they are completely different than the ones that we identified in 1997. And after this work, I got completely fascinated by this, and I wanted to continue working on this. And my husband and I, we both applied to go to Cornell University. And I really wanted to focus more on understanding what are those insects doing in the water? How do they reproduce? How do they behave? What are their population dynamics? And we applied to Cornell University, as Dave mentioned. And yeah, Dave was, by the way, the first person that I met, because when I arrived to Cornell, Bobby was not there. Bobby was in Rumble at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. So Bobby asked Dave to give me the welcome in Cornell. So Dave was the first person that I met in Cornell. And working with Bobby was an incredible experience for many, many reasons. Because she was also a mom, and she was this so energetic and so thoughtful researcher, but at the same, she was this incredible mom that will respect the timing on how to do research and how to be with the family. And that was a great role model for me. I studied this mayfly that Bobby had been studying for several years, and they were very curious about the population dynamics of this insect, because it was very abundant in some streams and it was less abundant in other ones. And they were questioning if this was because of predation, because of the drought, or maybe this was related with where they put the eggs. So I got interested after reading Bobby's papers on understanding how important was recruitment and how important was oviposition. Being in the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab gave me other perspective on how to do science. This was more experimentally driven, and some to look for causation effects, to look for the mechanisms. So my 5 years at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab were one of the best years of my life. I really learned a lot, but also experienced how to do research in group in a collaborative way. And Bobby was great on that. She had an amazing group every summer. She continues to go to Colorado, and she has built up on this research on the same site that is pretty amazing. Here's some of the research that we did with Bobby. So we studied the oviposition behavior of this mayfly. So this mayfly will land on the rock, then crawl under the rock and lay the eggs on their underside. And so we were thinking, well, maybe this is important. Why is this mayfly laying on a rock instead of just releasing the eggs? And how is this important for recruitment? And so I started to study more and more this behavior and the cost of benefits of having this behavior and how this will result in something important for the population dynamics of this species. And so a pattern that was really clear, and here you have the number of rocks, and you see, all these rocks in the rivers that were protruding out of the water. not all of them had eggs. This is an egg, this is the mayfly, this is Baetis, bicaudatus, and this is an egg mass. And each egg mass could have from 300 to 5,000 eggs. So the question is, why very few rocks, in this case, have so many eggs, egg masses, right? So I started to study their vision and how they detect the rocks, and what are the important attributes of the water around this rock that makes them go to that rock. We did all these incredible experiments year after year, and we end up understanding that they were these mayflies, you know, this very primitive insect, you know, they are with us since the Devonic. So they really select where to lay the eggs. So they prefer big rocks instead of small rocks, and they prefer these splashy sites more than places that didn't have velocity. Once we understood that, we started to also match these oviposition patterns with the recruitment of the larvae in those sites. And we started to find differences in the fish sites and also in the fishlet sites. And the questions were, well, are these related to the fish eating the mayflies, or are these related to other patterns? It turns out that it was more related to the amount of rocks that were available with these good characteristics that the mayflies were selecting to lay the eggs. So based on this research, we did all these big experiments, and this is a 2-year experiment in which we added these good rocks. We control them in several sites, and then we subtract the good rocks to see what happened with the eggs, and then to see what happened with the larvae. It turns out that after a year, we were able to control the recruitment of the larvae based on the manipulation that we did on the rocks and then on the eggs. So this was incredible for us, because we could really tell that this the selection of these rocks was really directing the recruitment of individuals to a site. And of course, then we started to realize how important are, for example, water fluctuations for the protruding of the rocks and for controlling mayfly populations. And of course, this is going to be related with predators like trout and with other things like dams, for example. So I remember the first time that we saw with Erin, I think Erin was reading one of the papers in which we were suggesting that controlling the dams and changing the level of the water is going to have an impact on how many rocks are protruding, and for that reason, how many mayflies are recruited to those sites. So already here, we were very interested in these questions related to more ecosystem type of questions, and how specific things could be influenced by these more larger scale patterns. By that time, and this is the personal things related to this research, as I told you before, I was already a mom, and this is my son. He was 5 years old then. So doing the work during the summers there, it was not easy, but it was fabulous, actually. I mean, it was difficult, and we didn't sleep that much, but my son really liked it to play in the stream and help me with catching the mayflies and doing the research. So I really remember those years doing really hard work, but at the same time enjoying and doing a PhD together, the whole family. Here's my husband as well. Then after, being in Cornell for these years, I started to questioning myself about going to other bigger questions related with the ecosystem and how the ecosystem is changing in several places. So I already applied to this grant for the Fundación para la Ciencia Portuguesa. So I applied to Portugal, and I was fortunate enough to got this grant. So this grant allowed me to have this postdoc with Dr. Manuel Grasa. He was my boss in Portugal at the Instituto do Mar, Universidad de Coimbra. this was fantastic because Esteban, my husband, already had a job in an NGO, in Wildlife Conservation Society in Quito, but I didn't have anything by then. And then I got this postdoc in Portugal, very far away, but the proposal was done to do it in this cloud forest in the Andes. So I got the grant, and my boss said, you don't have to live here, you could live in Ecuador, so you could do the research there. So that was fantastic because I will travel and have all these colleagues and friends in Europe, but I will do all my research work in Ecuador. These are the type of ecosystems that I was studying. These are montane forests, and once I arrived to Ecuador, it was very clear to me that there were a lot of problems of deforestation, especially in the cloud forest, as you go down to the plains, to the llanuras amazonicas. So I designed several experiments and research related to deforestation and how deforestation is affecting the input of organic matter and the relationship between diversity and ecosystem function. We started to learn more about the huge diversity that we had in Ecuadorian streams that was way bigger than what I was studied before in the highlands in Ecuador or in the Rockies. And also we started to see some interesting patterns in deforested section and in forested section, and how this changed, for example, the functional feeding groups that were on those sites. And we started to relate this with decomposition processes. So here you have some data on these decomposition curves, decay curves, in which we analyze different leaves that were entering the system in places with forest and in places with no forest. This was very revealing to me the importance first of invertebrates and some key ones that some could function as ecosystem engineers in the systems, and also the importance of microbial decomposition. During this work, this is Manuel, and probably you recognize here, this is Alex Flecker, and some of you probably recognize this is Blanca Rios. So at that time when we had this project, I met all these people and we started to collaborate more and more and to apply to small grants to do this research along the gradients. And we started to compare not just the gradient by itself, but asking questions about these differences of temperate systems and tropical systems. We started traveling and doing research along this gradient. So this is again the Antisana volcano. This is already going down the cloud forest. And then seeing how the whole ecosystem is changing, but how the diversity is also changing, and some processes and some critical variables along these gradients. This is just some pictures, so you see a little bit of Ecuador. This is already at 600 meters in the Amazon basin. This is already 500, 400, and you could see the Andes up here. And this is already people from Quechua communities, indigenous communities that live in the Napo basin, which is part of the Amazon basin. And we started to see different realities and how things change as you go down the gradient. And here, for example, this is already the Amazon rainforest. So this is already 200 meters in altitude. And this beautiful river has this color because it has a lot of sediment that is coming from the Andes. So I started to question how important is this erosion that is carried by the river from the Andean system to the Amazon floodplain. So we started to ask all these questions and the importance of the rain patterns in the area and the temperature patterns in the area. And we got together with a group of people to started questioning about the difference in latitude and elevation. And of course, we were not the first ones to do this. There have been several great naturalists that have been working on these questions before in other systems. So here's the picture, this drawing of Alexander von Humboldt. So he was one of the first ones to see these patterns from the poles to the tropics, right? And how we have this decrease in diversity as you go from the poles to the tropics, but also from the highlands, and sorry that this is in Spanish, from the highlands to the lowlands, right? So they started to see these similarities, right, in latitude and also in elevation. And many researchers have studied this in other systems. For example, in wild bees, this is a paper in wild bees, and they have seen this pattern that as you go high in altitude, you have a decrease in bees diversity. And however, not always you have these decreased curves. Sometimes you have this hump curve as well, in which the middle parts are more diverse than the middle parts are more diverse than the lower parts. And we basically wanted to ask this question, and this is the graph that was done for Alexander von Humboldt. And we wanted to ask the same question that he worked on plants, but on rivers. And basically ask if we're gonna find a difference between tropical and temperate rivers along these elevational gradients. And also trying to use these gradients as natural model systems in which we could ask potential important questions about climate change. Of course, other people have done this, but we wanted to apply this to river systems. And we wanted to understand, of course, changes in environmental variables. And there is a logic one here, temperature. As you go up, right, it gets colder. But there are other variables that are not that simple to understand how they will change as we go up or down the gradient, and how this will interact, or this will explain diversity that we have in the system, and also ecological processes that we will have along this gradient in temperate and tropical streams. So we wrote this proposal to NSF, an integrative trait-based approach to predicting variation in vulnerability of tropical and temperate streams, biodiversity, linking genetics, physiology, and ecology, to NSF, with all these universities and this great group of people that I'm going to show you in a minute. And we got the project, and we started to work along these gradients. And of course, a lot of the questions were inspired already in this seminal paper of Daniel Jansen, Why Mountain Passes Are Higher in the Tropics. And in this paper, Daniel Jansen hypothesized about the climate variability hypothesis and their importance to explain the physiology, the ecology, the evolution, and the patterns of biodiversity that we have along the gradients in tropical and temperate systems, and the mechanisms to have this higher diversity. And so we started to work on these two systems. So this is the temperate systems in the Rockies, and these are the tropical systems. This is the Cotopaxi volcano in Ecuador. And basically what he was proposing is that here you have the different elevations, low elevations in red, mid elevation, and high elevation. And what he was saying is that in tropical system, you will have the same temperature throughout the year. And of course, in the low elevation, it will be higher, in the middle, a little bit lower, and then in the high altitude will be cold, but throughout the year. But then in the temperate system, you will have this difference in seasons, of course. And he was saying that these differences are very important, of course, for the evolution of the organisms that are on those areas, predicting what would happen in different in different ecological and evolutionary aspects of these different organisms. So for example, he was predicting about the thermal tolerance that will be much narrower for tropical organisms than for temperate organisms that will be wider, right? He was predicting less acclimatization of the tropical species and more acclimatization of the temperate species, low dispersion, tropical species, high dispersion on temperate species, and the range of distribution, the breadth of the distribution of tropical species will be lower, and the breadth of distribution of the temperate species would be higher. And these at the same time will promote higher diversity in the tropical system in evolutionary time, and lower diversity in the temperate sites, for organisms in the temperate sites. This has been proven for plants and for other terrestrial organisms, but this was the first time that we were proposing this for aquatic species. So we conducted this research, and initially the project was thought to be done for fish and amphibians and invertebrates, but at the end, because of the abundances in tropical ecosystems, it was easier to work with invertebrates. So a lot of the data that I'm going to show you is about invertebrates, but we do have some data in amphibians. So here you have some, and here I'm just showing you some snapshots of the data, but the graphs that Jansen was predicting, these are basically logger data that we have through time. We basically were able to reproduce those temperature graphs, water temperature graphs. Very interesting. But something that was very interesting in the Ecuadorian sites, in the tropical sites, is that the high altitude sites had a little bit more daily variation. So that is also something important that we got out of this research. So even though we had, this same temperature throughout the year, that was true, in the high altitude sites, the difference in one day could be really high. We could have more than 20 degrees sometimes in difference, depending on the shading that we have on those systems. In any case, so the first things that we presented is the temperature data, and then here I'm showing you some data about the diversity, and here we have some morphological taxonomy richness. So basically, you see in Ecuador, comparing with here's the taxonomic, the morphological diversity in Ecuador and in Colorado, and you see that it was higher in Colorado according to the morphological data. But once we did genetic, we discovered that there was a lot of cryptic diversity. So things that look very much alike, that look exactly the same, when we did DNA barcoding, we realized that they were much different. So regarding the climate variability hypothesis, we could see that we have higher diversity in the tropical sites comparing to the temperate sites, as predicted by the hypothesis. Also, in terms of the distribution and the elevational range, we also have basically the hypothesis was true as well. So we have this higher difference in Ecuador comparing with in Colorado. This, of course, was the work of many people. So there are a lot of students here and postdocs that work on this on this question. So it's not just me; it was a big group of people doing this. But basically, here we are measuring the critical thermal limits, and we could see that yes, temperate species have a wider distribution in the critical thermal limits compared to the tropical species. And in terms of dispersal, we found that yes, temperate species disperse more than the tropical species, and the same, and here you could see another version of that migration, but also we calculated a speciation rate, which was higher for Ecuadorian species than for Colorado species. So basically, we think that the climate variability hypothesis applies very well for aquatic species when we compare tropical and temperate sites, which was one of the important implications of this work to understand. Also very important in terms of applications for climate change and using these mountains as models of understanding the impact of climate change in aquatic species. And what we're seeing really here is that tropical species are being more impacted, especially the ones in the lowlands, not in the highlands, because the ones in the lowlands are the ones that have the less variability of thermal tolerance. And for that reason, they are the ones that get impacted in a higher proportion, and they get affected and they die and don't survive when we apply. So here I'm giving a summary, but we also did these very, very specific experiments. We had all these mesocosmos with changing in water temperature to test these questions about climate change and the effects on aquatic populations. While we were doing this research, with one of my colleagues, Juan Guayasamín, he's an herpetologist, we applied to these USAID projects that was basically given for people that were working already with NSF partners, NSF grantees. And we received these grants, and we were able to analyze way more about these gradients, about these Amazon ecosystem. So this is the Napo watershed, and the Napo is in this part of Ecuador and is one of the Amazon watersheds. And basically while we were doing this project in the Evo-Track, we realized that many of the streams and rivers that we were analyzing were not in good condition. So it was difficult for the project because initially the Evo-Track was planned to do it in pristine streams, but there was all these modifications. So this other project will link it completely with what are the main threats, what are the main problems that we have in the area with aquatic ecosystems, and what are the fauna and the diversity in general that was being affected by these problems in the area. So we started to model a lot of the diversity that we have in the area with all these aquatic species to understand what happens with the vertebrate aquatic diversity in the Napo, where are they more present, and are these overlapping with the maps of threats in the area. It was very interesting because we analyzed this for vertebrate species, but also for invertebrate species. And this is the map for invertebrate species. And as you could see, the higher diversity is not in the lowlands, it's actually in this middle section here. So even though the project of Evo-Track told us that there was this increase in diversity as you go down, it seems like here in the Piedemonte, the diversity stops to be as high, so it starts to go down. So this is kind of a hump shape pattern, which we were not expecting, which is completely different from the bigger fauna, for the vertebrate fauna. We also analyzed the human impact in the area. And I don't know if some of you have been in Ecuador, but this is where the oil blocks that we have in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So this area is heavily impacted. Sadly, this is one of the highest areas of amphibians population, for example. So there is overlap with the highest biodiversity hotspots with these areas that have high impact on the rivers. And this is Tena, this is Tena, and this is Baeza. So of course, most of the impacts are related to where are the roads, right? And where are the colonization and how this colonization is spreading. However, you could see that there are some areas here that are pretty pristine. So there are still areas in the Andean Amazon region that are in very good shape. We also try to, based on these maps of threats, try to predict what would be the ecological integrity of those sites to be able to help all the areas in the Amazon that didn't have that much studies and don't have data to actually understand the ecological integrity of those freshwater systems. So we started to start predicting, based on this data, what would be the ecological integrity in other basins. And that is when we started to move to a higher level and having this analysis at a bigger scale at the regional level in the Amazon. And here, the basin that I was telling you about before is the Napo. And the Napo in the Amazon is just 1.5% of the whole water system that goes into the Amazon. So it's pretty small comparing to the rest of the Amazon that is the biggest system in the world. So we started to ask the questions that we apply here to other systems like the Marañón, Ucayali, Madeira. And for that, we started to work with different groups and different initiatives. And maybe here you see some faces, some familiar faces as well. So here's Alex Flecker, here's Elizabeth Anderson. I know that Erin is going to a postdoc with Elizabeth. And we have this initiative that is called Ríos Vivos Andinos Amazónicos. And we are really interested to understand the impacts that we're having in this area and how this area, the impacts in the higher Andes is having on the lower Amazon basin. Also, there's this other group from Cornell, the Computational Sustainability Lab has this group that is analyzing the impacts of dams in the, not just in the Andean Amazon region, but all in the whole Amazon basin. And I'm not going to talk about that project today, but with this group, we started to have a lot of research. A lot of this research was not going to the site, but basically recuperating a lot of the data to understand what is going on with the freshwater systems in the area. So, for example, this actually this is wrong. This paper is out already. But Shar Sadiki from Gainesville did this beautiful analysis in which we took all this data from stations, hydrological stations in the Andean region, but also in other parts. We try to get as much data as possible to understand what are the hydrological patterns here and how those patterns are related to the biodiversity, to the ecology, and to the ecological processes in these rivers. One of the main ones that we care about is erosion and the amount of sediment that is going through the system, because the Andean range is pretty young. So because it's young, the amount of rain that it receives impacts heavily on the erosion that it has. And this is different from the Escudo Guyanés and Escudo Brasileño, which are very old mountains. They don't give any sediment anymore, very, very low amount of sediment. So we have here clear waters. We have in this area as well, clear waters. Here from Venezuela and Colombia, we have black waters that are coming from this very old system as well, and very inundated forests with black waters, very humid type of waters. And from the Andean region, we have all this heavy sediment that is coming from this area. And of course, we're working on the problems of the dams in the region and hydroelectric projects that we have on the region. And this is one of Weinmiller papers about the development in the whole Amazon. And here we were talking about how this will impact fish populations that we have on the area, cutting this connectivity from the Andean rivers to the lowland rivers in the Amazon. Of course, studying this and realizing the importance of the Andean rivers and the Andean exports of sediment, it started us to evaluate if we are really respecting these what I call the tropical montane rivers, and analyzing that, you know, when you talk about high altitude systems, there are these really high alpine systems that are very, very different from the lowland systems, of course, but people have not worked in this intermediate section. And sometimes they think that they are not important because there are these very narrow bands that you have in the mountains. However, in this paper, I wanted to emphasize the importance of this area for the production of the whole basins in any system, in any place in the world, and how in tropical systems, this could be exacerbated because we have more rain in these areas. And this is part of the paper. Then I use these three different places in which we talk about diversity, endemicity, and the importance of this area in terms of the production of the system and the ecology of the systems. And while I was doing this work in the Andean Amazon region, we have been working there for 15 years now. I got contacted by Jeffrey Sachs and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And they were very worried about the Amazon, especially because of the fires that we had in 2019. And they invite us to form this group, and we formed the science panel for the Amazon. And we started with 60 scientists, and we met for the first time in 2019. And then we decided that it was important to produce a report in which scientists are telling us about the reality in the Amazon. So Carlos Nobre and myself, we started to put together this group of scientists, but now not only scientists, but also practitioners and indigenous groups and people that live in the Amazon that could contribute to this report to tell about the fate of the Amazon and the importance that the Amazon has for the whole globe. And this panel right now has more than 180 scientists, and we are in the second draft. So the report is coming soon, hopefully in, we think in April or May. And basically the report has three parts. We're analyzing the Amazon as a regional entity of the Earth system. So the functioning, how is the functioning in the geology, the biology, the evolution of life, the evolution of humans in this area as well. The second part is about the anthropogenic changes that we have in this area. And the third part is more about proposing solutions. So comparing to the IPCC, for example, that has this analysis and these projections for the future, we are trying to give here some projections for the future, but not just that, but because this group is not paid by the governments, from the Latin American governments, we want to actually be policy prescriptive, in some ways give solutions and to offer this to the governments to actually implement these solutions. Some of the main challenges that we have here is how to escalate these solutions, because sometimes these solutions are very local, regional, but we know that the changes in the Amazon don't have only impacts in the Amazon and locally or regionally, but are having impacts globally. So I'm not having a lot of results for you guys today, but we're working in all these areas: geology and evolution of life, biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, biosphere atmosphere interactions, and people of the Amazon. And here you see some of the graphs that we are producing, and in which we are basically providing all this information regarding the importance of the evolution of the Amazon, the geology, and how this have impacted the diversity and this incredible biodiversity hotspots that we have on the area. So this area, here's Ecuador, and here's the Napo Basin. These are one of the areas with the highest biodiversity in the world. So areas that are very important because of that and their endemicity. Also, we are presenting these patterns about what is going on with the weather system and how this is changing. And also what happens with the history of human populations on the Amazon. The Amazon is not as pristine as we thought. There has been people there for a very long time. And these, of course, have also changed the movement of species within the region. The second part is dealing more with the anthropogenic changes in the basin, the fires, the degradation. And here's a map of some of this degradation that we have in the area. And we are doing this analysis of colonization, living, moving, and working in the Amazon, and how this is impacting heavily the area, analyzing these drivers and the impacts of change and the projections of change in the future. Some of the policies, analysis of the past policies, and what, for example, Bolsonaro policies and how these are impacting heavily, for example, on the destruction of the Amazon, especially in this part here. And of course, how this is impacting climate change. This is other analysis. This graph you saw already of the dams, but here are other things like mining, oil, and also soy production, and so on. And some of the things that are very frightening about our analysis is that we are seeing already some sort of savannization. So scientists are predicting that these areas of the Amazon in the southern part are becoming a savanna. And we have all these changes in seasonality and the frequency of rain events. However, in the lower part, we see already increase in rainfall. And this, of course, is impacting also heavily the area because we see a lot of erosion. And recently, I don't know if you have heard, but we had a beautiful waterfall that was called Cascada San Rafael, very close to a hydroelectric project that we have in the area, the Coca-Cola Sinclair project. And this cascada basically disappeared, collapsed, and people were thinking that maybe this is related with the construction of this project. However, other scientists think that this is normal processes of erosions that are being exacerbated by the amount of rainfall that we are receiving in the area. The third part of the report is dealing with the solutions. So we are providing solutions at different levels, at different scales, at different spatial and time scales for the area. This is in Peru. This is a fish that people eat a lot of fish in the area, in Manaus, in Leticia, in Iquitos. So in this area, this is probably one of the most difficult parts of the report, because basically we are trying to build a different vision of these sustainable pathways and how to deal with the problems in the Amazon in a different way. Talking about new bioeconomy practices, and also looking at conservation, restoration, and even remediation in some parts that have been already destroyed. And also how to empower Amazon people. And when I mean Amazon people, is not just indigenous people that are living in the area, but there are huge cities in the area. We have Manaus with more than 3 million people living there in the middle of the Amazon. So how to empower local people to have an impact on the sustainability of the Amazon. So hopefully this is going to be ready soon, and I will make sure to give this to Dave. So if people are interested to know more about this, I will be happy to provide more information about this. For me, this was a great experience being as a co-chair, because it really opened my eyes to different things, not just the problems that I have been always focusing in the rivers, but also the interactions of the human systems with the river systems, and how everything is related. And for that reason, how we have an important role as academics to providing this information and try to do this link with decision makers and with policymakers. This is part of some of the workshops that we're having to build this vision, these principles, and the values on the Amazon. And I just wanted to show this because conservation is not just about working and knowing about the science, but how we move this information to the people to really value what we have, and based on recognizing those values, recognizing those principles, we could, as people, help to conserve this area. And I wanted to finish with this beautiful picture of these indigenous boys here. They are from the Quechua community, and open for reflection, maybe with you guys, to see if you have questions. For me, as a woman in Latin America, I think there's a lot of opportunities to do research in Latin America. It's true that there is no money to do research. It's difficult. However, I think that I see a different reality from before, and when I started to do science. And some of the reasons that I accepted this new challenge in my life to be a provost of a university is related with that. Even though it's better than before, still, when I was revising the numbers that we have in the university, still 70% of the professors are still men, and only 30% are women. So at the beginning, I never even imagined that I was going to accept something like this, but I thought that it would be a nice challenge to help younger populations to reach more equality in the opportunities that we give to our students and to women that are interested in science and in other engineering fields. So this is my new challenge now. However, I'm not gonna leave the rivers and streams that I love, because that is part of my life, and that is what I wanted to present today. So thank you very much for hearing me. So I'm open for questions.
I will give some applause. One person applauding. Thank you so much, Andrea, for a wonderful talk. There's a lot of stuff in there.
Thank you, Dave.
It looks like, Aaron, do you want to? Looks like questions are starting to come into the Q&A, so feel free to post things in Q&A.
Yeah, we've got some love from Deborah Hill in the Q&A for you, Andrea.
Oh, Deb.
So while people are formulating questions, I can sneak in a question of my own right here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no.
One of the things that really struck me about looking at the comparison between the Amazon basin and the Rocky Mountains is the degree with which traditional taxonomy painted a very different picture than the cryptic species that were revealed by genetic techniques. Is that a general problem with work in the tropics? Have we just vastly underestimated the diversity that's there? Or is that something that's maybe peculiar to aquatic systems? You have a sense of that?
Yeah, no, it's not at all peculiar to aquatic systems. So it's in every system. So in plants and in animals, we see this huge diversity. So for example, in birds, you see, and some of them, because we think that we have this turnover rate, that is higher in the tropics, some of those differences are very subtle and you don't distinguish them. So you have all these cryptic species and for mayflies. So, I invited my friend from Argentina, Eduardo Dominguez. I mean, he's the expert of mayflies of all Latin America. And he will tell me, no, that's the same, And then when we'll do the genetic analysis, it turns out that is something different. So yeah, we see that in several groups, and in plants is evident. The diversity is huge. However, people have studied more plants than aquatic species. And that's why for us was pretty surprising. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks.
I'm really impressed, or excited about how you finished, I guess, when you're talking about your provost work and the opportunities there you have. I really love the journey you outlined for us in your presentation today, from your PhD research all the way through to becoming a provost at the university. And I thought it was really exciting that you stated, you know, you looked up, sorry, my dog's upset.
That's okay.
You stated, you know, the percentage of men and women in the maybe the department that you're working on with as a provost. And I think that, and like being cognizant of that. And I was wondering if you, like, what tools do you think you have in your toolbox for creating a more equitable workspace within the university setting?
Great, thank you for asking that question. Yeah, we 5 years ago we created a group that is called WISE, that is for women in science and engineering, and we already have several scholarships for women. So we go to high schools and we are encouraging people to apply to this grant. So that is one of the things that we already have, and we have a program for innovation and creativity in that is, I mean, it's open for everybody, but we encourage a lot of women, if they participate in this program, they could go to our university at no cost. So basically we have grants for them. So that is one of the big things that we do. Other thing that we do, and I have always doing in my lab, is that to have a lot of students, right, and a lot of women students that are interested to go to the field. There's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of people interested in that. So I'd love to have young students come into my lab. And Deb was a visiting professor in my lab, so we had fantastic time. I didn't show a picture of Deb, but she was an incredible person in my lab, and she knows how diverse is my lab. So that I think that's important, that professors incorporate in their research students. So our university is still pretty young. It has 30 years old, and we don't have PhD programs. We have only a new master program, but we don't have PhDs. So we, you see in when you analyze the demography, you see in the students that there is pretty much the same ratios, female and male. But then once you go higher up, those ratios have started to change a lot. And once you see professors, there's very few professors, women and men. So what we want to create is graduate programs to be able to offer women and in general, you know, to offer more opportunities to people to come to the university. So that's something that we need to work on, and to lower that disparity right now in the ratios of female and male.
Great. I'm seeing some thank yous for your presentation in the Q&A. Hillary says, thank you for an inspiring presentation. Thank you also for mentioning women in science and academia and for being a champion. Any other questions out there? I think what we could do now, since I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, if for people who want to maybe meet Andrea face-to-face, in other words, have your face up on the Zoom screen, maybe add me in the Q&A, and then we can promote you to being a panelist here, and you can sort of join the group here. Those of you who are not interested in that, thank you for attending, and feel free to sign off. And I'm kind of looking at you, Lytle Lab grad students. This is somebody you should meet rather than just see her seminar. Let me see who's present here. Amanda, you can add Angelica and Christy Cruz and anybody else who asks to be added.
How many students do you have, Dave, now?
Well, so Erin just finished, so she just defended her PhD, and she is now, in fact, a postdoc with Elizabeth Anderson.
Oh, good.
And yeah, so I still haven't come to grips with her leaving the lab, so I still think of her as a grad student, even though she's not. And here are a couple others. So Christy Cruz is finishing a master's degree, and she's looking at seasonal ponds here in the Willamette Valley in Oregon.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Angelica Curtin, who's down there, is doing a PhD, and she's doing some population modeling. And in fact, we're about to head down to the Grand Canyon, where you may not know it, but the largest experiment that has ever been done on a river is founded in principle on your research.
Oh, really?
Yes. So they are reoperating some of the largest hydro